can actually move it up there if you want.
Hi everyone, we're just adjusting a little bit so you guys can read.
Yes, but they're backwards. We still haven't figured that out.
Oh yeah. Okay, so it's Jen and Marilyn here. We are super excited to have you with us. We see people logging on, so that's great. We are live from
Our Lady of Victory. Thank you for hosting us.
So the best will ever open your doors for us this morning so that we can go live with you. We want to really spend this hour digging deeper into functions of behavior. We do a full day presentation on functions of behavior, so this is
2 full days almost, because level 1 and 2 really go really deep into level.
You're right, and we could spend months on it, especially with us.
Try to make us stop talking.
Yeah, so all behavior does happen for a reason, and how we look at that through the behavior analytic lens is to look at why that behavior is happening, and then we plan interventions that are evidence-based to address it. So a couple of important things to mention. We are about to very much oversimplify functions of behavior because it's really hard to do it in an hour.
It's like 7 master's level courses and we're going to do it in 1 hour. So we are simplifying this. Absolutely.
Yeah, and we're going to focus on functions of behavior as it relates to all behavior, not just challenging behavior. A lot of people associate applied behavior analysis with challenging behavior. And we, of course, are skilled in that area, but we mostly just look at the antecedents and the consequences that impact all behavior. So whether it's specific learning behaviors, and we'll go through lots of examples with you this morning. And the other thing to say is we're also going to oversimplify the process that we use to determine the function of the behavior. So we don't want you to walk away from a 1-hour webinar and feel like
you only need one example of each behavior. Too.
Yeah.
We take days worth of data to do this, but we're just kind of giving you an example. So when you're looking at the different examples, think, okay, if this was happening every single day and someone was here to take data for it, that's where we would get that conclusion, not from just one simple example.
Yeah, and in real life, when we're observing, we're looking at a lot more nuances than what we're about to present to you.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
That being said. All right, so we're going to start with escape behavior. So escape behavior allows you to successfully escape or delay a situation. So typically you're in an A condition. I think that's our next slide. So let's talk ahead. Our A condition of an unpreferred situation, right? So something that you would prefer not to be doing. There's something better to be happening right now. A behavior occurs. So notice that we just said a behavior. Although, of course, we care what the behavior is because often, it's behavior that you're being injured or that can be dangerous for the child themselves. We don't actually need to know what the behavior is itself in order to determine what the function is. We look at what happens right before and right after. So the behavior could be anything in this column. And then the C is something that allows you to successfully escape that or delay it. So what's happening is something's happening that you don't love, something occurs and no longer happening anymore. So that's how we really look at escape. And of course, like we said, this is oversimplification. And we're going to dive further into when we're doing your assessments, why they're escaping, how we can avoid that as well. But if we successfully see an escape, that's what we're looking for.
And how we use our evidence-based strategies is there's antecedent strategies that will prevent that behavior or evoke that behavior if it's a behavior that you want to teach.
Yeah.
And the consequence strategies will either no longer reinforce it or start to reinforce the new behavior. So we hone very much in on the A's and C's for that reason, regardless of the function. So a lot of times when we're working with teams, they focus heavily on the topography of the behavior, what the behavior physically looks like he's kicking me and I want to talk to you all about how he's kicking me. And believe me, I want to hear all about how he's kicking you. But the juice of what my involvement is going to entail is actually in the A's and the C's, and those are the changes that are really going to impact the behavior over the long term.
And often when we're coming in, especially from something like escape and attention, what we're going to notice is that function's not going to go away, right? So it's not like the child's no longer ever going to want to escape just because we put a behavior plan in place. What we're going to do is teach them appropriate ways to do that and then delay that. So for example, teaching a replacement behavior of saying like, can I go for a sip of water? Great, that's a great way to escape. Now they're no longer running at the classroom. Then typically what we would do is delay that. Yeah, you can go for water in 5 minutes. Yeah, you know what, you can go for water in 20 minutes. And then eventually, yeah, you can go for water at the end of the class if they can accept that.
And we make decisions on all those time frames based on data. So we take data currently on where your students at, how long they can wait, how long they can delay that type of reinforcement. And then we make intervention decisions always based on those numbers so that it's effective, right? Because if you just pick a number out of thin air, I'll try 5 minutes or I'll try 5 questions first, and then I'll allow the escape. Well, then you're not going to be successful if the student actually needed it at 1 or 2 or 3 or 4. So,
right.
Okay.
So we have some examples here. So what we chose to do for escape, attention, and tangible is choose the exact same behavior in all of the columns to show you how the behavior is not specifically what's important. It's the A's and C's that will control the behavior, or control the functions, right? So our first one is arrive late for class. So this can apply to any grade, whether it is high school grades, whether it is, children arriving late with their parents, whatever it is. So we gave an antecedent of maybe this is an unpreferred class or an unpreferred activity happening in that class as an A. The behaviors arrive late for school, and the consequences are that maybe they're sent to the office to go get a late slip. So if we saw that repeatedly and the behavior continues to happen, we know that a behavior only continues if it's reinforced. Therefore, the consequence is reinforcing it. So sending them to the office in this situation is increasing the likelihood of them being late for class every single day, even though it might have been intended to be a punishment and decrease that behavior. It's actually increasing it in the situation.
Or like what we always ask is, what happened here?
Yeah.
Why did this happen? And so did it successfully allow the student to delay an escape? And a lot of times, unfortunately, whatever your intervention is in the consequence column is actually further exacerbating the problem because it's allowing further delay and further escape. And that happens all the time with these types of behaviors. And it creates behavior, students are never born engaging in behavior in applied behavior analysis and behaviors in general. We believe that every behavior is a learned behavior. And so, we learn all behavior through reinforcement. So clearly this has been reinforced in the past. And that's basically what the cusp of what we're trying to find is. What's the reinforcement that's maintaining this behavior for a long time? And how are we going to either shut it off or prevent it, right?
Yeah. And remember, like we said, this isn't a one-time situation that someone's late for class, right? This is a repetitive situation that we need to be taking care of. Another example is completing math work equations. So that would be your behavior. So if the teacher says, okay, everybody, you have 10 minutes to complete your math and any unfinished work will be homework, okay? The behavior is completing your equation, and then the consequences is no homework. So that is successfully delaying bringing your math work home and having to do homework, right? So this isn't a problem behavior. This is a behavior that we actually want to increase or maintain. But it's showing that the escape is from homework, right? So if the antecedent is a threat of homework, the behavior is finishing your homework, or your schoolwork, sorry, and the consequences is no homework, you're successfully delaying. So what happened here? They successfully delayed not having to bring their math work home. So this is an example of a behavior that we might actually want to increase, or that we might actually have to teach for some students so that they're successfully escaping, which would be their function of behavior.
Yeah.
Anything that wrong?
No, I just love it when we have examples that are skills that we're teaching, like
Yes.
completing the worksheet, versus always thinking of it in terms of a challenging behavior like being late for class. So you'll find throughout these functions that we do this with every function, is we're trying to show you that we use it for how we look at all learning, whether it's learning of a challenging behavior or learning of a replacement behavior.
Yeah, and that might be a great example of a replacement behavior. If the problem behavior was something like never completing their homework, then we might functionally teach them to complete their extra work in class so that we didn't have the problem of not completing the homework. And last but not least, so transitions between activities in class. So this can be as simple as something in a kindergarten class, transitioning from one activity to another. It can be as big as transitioning from one class to the next in a high school. So this can apply to any different situation. So when they get to class, they're going to engage in a non-preferred activity. So this doesn't mean something that they absolutely hate. It just means I'd rather be in the, hallway talking to my friends, or I'd rather be staying at the previous activity. It's just not as preferred as what they're currently doing. They transition and they move to the next activity. And if there is any problem behavior there, they can successfully avoid transitioning to that activity. Even if it's a delay of 5 seconds, 10 seconds, 30 seconds of a tantrum, for example, they can successfully avoid going to that next activity. So what happens sometimes is we see calming behaviors put in there, or delay tactics to, calm the behavior, which we understand. But what we want to look at is that antecedent, is they're trying to avoid that next activity and they've successfully delayed it. And we sometimes end up helping them successfully delay it even longer by adding additional things in that C column. So what happened here? Transitioning allowed them to successfully delay or stop engaging in that preferred activity in the first place. So I can give you a full example with actual things happening. So say you're engaged in math and you're not doing your math, sitting there talking to your peers, not talking to your peers, supposed to be completing that math work. Transition happens, so whether the activity is done, we're going to the next subject, bell rings, we're going to the next class, they can successfully delay ever having done that math by transitioning to that next activity. So we see that a lot as well.
Yeah. So sometimes students will wait, right? Wait for the bell. Like we have students all the time where it's like, I know the second period bell goes off in 10 minutes. So if I just sit here long enough, then that transition will allow me to escape this. So if we don't, yeah, we're totally 90s product. That's what I was thinking. Yeah. Anything else about escape?
No, I think that's it.
So we have, as you know, neurotypical or relatively neurotypical adults have a wide variety of behaviors that we can engage in that allow us to escape things, and we talk about that a lot in our full day training. But there are probably adaptive ways that we escape things. We can we can say no, we can, all kinds of things. And a lot of our students don't have that, and it doesn't depend on an ability or a disability for our students. Some of them it's more effective for them to engage in a challenging behavior than it is to engage in the more appropriate behavior. So we just have to tie more reinforcement to the appropriate behavior than we do to the challenging behavior and flip that balance.
And the reason it's usually more effective is because these behaviors escalate to the point where you're dealing with a safety situation or you're dealing with the safety of others. So therefore you have to remove them, and we're not judging that, and we're not saying don't do that. But what we're saying is we really want to look at that replacement behavior, because you're going to have no choice when the behavior escalates to the point where you have to remove them, or you have to remove the rest of the class, or you have to remove the demand in order for everyone to stay safe. That is going to reinforce the behavior. So that's why we look at teaching that replacement behavior, because often you're left with no other choice in the consequences but to remove them or to remove the rest of the class.
Yeah. Okay. All right, so next we're going to talk about attention. Attention function is really any behavior that gets your attention from other people. So it's another socially mediated behavior. So you'll see that escape, attention, and tangible are all socially mediated behaviors. So they're not behaviors that would be evoked to just you all by your lonesome, not involving the social world around you. And so that's kind of the gist of attention. And again, we as adults have lots of behaviors in our repertoire that allow us to get appropriate attention from people. From me talking to you, to me doing a webinar, to me chatting with someone after this. They're all ways that we are engaging in attention seeking from each other. And it's important to note that we don't, in behavior analysis, we are not saying attention seeking, meaning a negative behavior. No, we are simply saying when you want something from someone else, whether it be compassion, whether it be, a relationship, whether it be any kind of a connection. Yeah, like that's what we're talking when we talk about the attention function. I think sometimes when people who don't understand behavior analysis look at it or think about it, they're thinking attention seeking, like that student's like running around trying to get attention. And that's not what we mean. We don't mean it in a really negative way. We're just talking about it as in terms of that's the term we use to describe relationships and all of that stuff. Okay, so the ABCs in general of attention, the A would usually look like I'm currently not accessing social attention, either because I am not able to, I don't have a lot of ways to get that social attention, or for some reason, like in a busy classroom, people are busy, so they're not engaging in one-to-one attention with me right now.
And to clarify that can be seconds sometimes. So sometimes they're like, I was just talking to him. I'm like, you're not right this second. So often they say, well, he is accessing attention. He's been accessing attention all day. Some kiddos need a lot more than others, and that's due to setting events, which we're not going to get deeply into, but that could just be for seconds that they're not accessing attention.
Because it has to do with what we call their motivating operation, which we also won't get into. But basically, what sets up the antecedent condition is motivating factors that speak specifically to attention. How deprived are they overall of attention? If they're used to getting it 24/7, so some of you who are kinder teachers can relate to this. When you have a kinder that's used to like one-to-one with mommy all day, they're deprived, their deprivation levels are much different than a kiddo that's just come from a busy preschool who's totally used to not getting a lot of attention, and so they're going to seek less of it, if you know what I mean, both appropriately and inappropriately. And so it speaks to a bigger issue than just the antecedent, but the antecedent's what we look at because it's what's impacting this behavior right now. So again, behavior, it can be any behavior in this column, but we know that if the attention function is continuing, then the reinforcement's coming from either positive reinforcement or negative reinforcement. So positive or negative attention. Yes. So the brain doesn't care if someone's yelling at you or if someone's going, hi, you're so awesome. If the function is attention, then you'll take what you can get basically from that. And so we look at that as well. What kind of attention is the student getting in the C column? Because sometimes the teacher's like, I'm not reinforcing it, but I'm reprimanding him every time. And we're like, oh, it's totally reinforcing it. So this is generally what the flow is. And so again, you're going to see with these examples. So the first example, arrive late for class. So the important thing to note here is the topography looks the same as in the escape condition, right? As in the tangible condition that you're about to see. But we're going to show you what we do when we look at function is we look at what is different about the A's and C's. That's how we know the function. It's not the topography of the behavior that tells us function. So student has a spare period and was alone right before, okay? So let's say period 1, they have a spare, they're alone, they're in an attention deprived condition. Then they arrive late for class. Why? Well, because he gets or she gets specific reprimand from the teacher in front of the class. So even though you may not think this is a positive experience for the student, and the student may not feel this is a positive experience, they're simply engaging in behavior that's met reinforcement in the past. If I come on time, then I get no specific attention. And if I've been in an attention-deprived condition, and this is what I know comes next, I'm going to evoke this behavior. Does that make sense? That makes sense? Okay, so what's happening here is the student successfully received negative attention. So again, the student doesn't want it, but the brain is going to go, I'm attention deprived. What's the quickest way? What's the quickest route to get to attention? Walk in 2 minutes late. Every darn time it's going to happen. So next behavior, completing math equation on a worksheet. So again, this is the same behavior as escape, totally different function. How do we know that? We look at the A's and C's. The A is the students working alone in class. So if I'm working alone in class, I complete my worksheet. Ding, ding, the teacher praises me. So what's happening here? I get positive praise from the teacher, positive attention. So next time I'm in the A condition, I'm working alone, my brain's going to go, how do I get the best, juiciest attention from my teacher right now? I have to complete this worksheet first, right? Because in my learning history, this is what leads me to this reinforcement. And so same could be true for some students if this behavior was not completing my worksheet. I'm alone in class, I don't complete my worksheet, but the teacher comes over and gives me one-to-one support and tells me that I can do it and gives me encouragement. Oh man, it's more beneficial for me not to complete the work in that condition, right? So this is why when we're involved in a case, we really are heavy on the observations. Like some people are like, how many observations are you going to do? It's because I'm tracking all kinds of data around my A's and my C's to see what's truly maintaining it and how can we change the A's, change the C's to get the same outcome for your student.
Sorry, can I just point something else? Totally. It's interesting to note here too that reinforcement is something that will increase or maintain a behavior, right? And punishment will decrease a behavior. If you're reprimanding your student every single day, you're assuming it's a punishment, but it's actually reinforcement. And that's why we're trying to break that word reinforcement from like the word reward, right? We understand that you're not like giving him a cookie every time he's late for class, but it is in fact reinforcement because it's maintaining that behavior. So if you've got a kiddo who's coming every single day late and this is your situation, it is being reinforced. If for one day you did yell at him in front of the class and it stopped, then you have effectively punished it because that behavior has decreased or went away. But if you're noticing the same repetitive pattern, that's when we start to say, how are we reinforcing that?
And all behavior is predictable behavior. So if you as a teacher or as an educator or as a parent has reprimanded a child in the past and it decreased their future behavior, your brain is reinforced, okay, by the escape of that behavior. So that's your function behavior. I'm going to reprimand again next time because it stopped it. It delayed or stopped the thing that I wanted to delay or stop. Does that make sense? So then next time you're in that situation with a new student, you're thinking, reprimand. No, Billy, it's not time right now, right? And then what happens is your brain goes, I've met reinforcement in the past, but wait a minute, why isn't it meeting reinforcement now? And oftentimes we are tricked. So what happens in the C column is it might immediately stop the behavior. And then your brain goes, yes, I got reinforced. But within 10 seconds, that kid goes back into that behavior. Why? Because you're continuing your intervention based on your history of reinforcement with that intervention. Even though it's not really working, it's giving you enough reinforcement to continue it in the future. Does that make sense? And so back to this behavior. So transition between activity. So again, same behavior that we saw in the escape condition. It's attention. How do we know? Well, he was in independent work. Again, attention deprived condition led immediately into transitioning into the next class. Why? Because the peers engage with him during the transition. So whether you're in elementary school, whether you're in high school, this is what happens.
Standing in line, they talk, or standing in the hallways at their lockers.
This was totally me in high school. Like when that bell went, I transitioned really nicely in my next class. Why? Because I was chitter-chattering the whole way there and chitter-chattering when I got into the class with the teacher about whatever, right? And so this would have been how I was reinforced with positive attention very heavily. So again, what's happening here? Successfully accesses social attention, right? Some of our students, though, if they don't have somebody to give them that attention for the positive transition, what do? Engage in a problem behavior during the transition, right? Or not engage in the transition at all because, man, all of a sudden in the C column, somebody gives me more attention for that than they did when I was transitioning appropriately. Yeah. So when we put all of our prompts in the A column to evoke the behaviors we want, to evoke the transition behaviors, to evoke the math worksheet behaviors, to, all that kind of stuff, evoke the arriving on time behaviors, and then we tie that reinforcement to it really quickly. So don't think reinforcement is like a token you gave the student. We don't often put those in place with most students. We don't think that it's like a candy we gave the student. Again, we don't usually do that because what we really need to put in place is attention. We already know that that's the reinforcer. Why would we add an additional tangible reinforcer? Does that make sense? So that's another value of knowing the function. If you know the function and you're pretty sure about it, you use that function as your reinforcer. You don't need to then find a squishy toy. The exception to this is obviously those students who we're teaching a lot of new skills to. Yeah. And so like when we're heavily involved in the assessment classes, shout out to Our Lady of Victory's assessment class. You guys are awesome. So we will have to put in a lot more tangible reinforcers and a lot of other reinforcement because those kiddos are learning a lot of things and they're learning them, it's coming at them pretty quickly.
Yeah, and they're not necessarily understanding contingencies.
That's right. And some students, like certainly higher functioning students, regardless of grade or age, we can explain the contingency. Hey, dude, when this is happening and you evoke this behavior, this is what's going to happen next. And when this is happening and this behavior happens, this is what's going to happen next. The problem is, unless they have a lot of support and practice, we call that priming, going through the process with support to get that reinforcement. And it's really a staff training issue at that point to make sure that they're giving the reinforcement at the right time and for the right behavior. Yeah. Then your student's like, oh, okay, I totally get it. But a lot of our students, we have to change the agencies without their knowledge. Yeah. Okay.
Okay, tangible. So this basically gives you access to an item or an activity. Simple as that. When you do not have that item or activity, a behavior accesses you want.
Yeah. Excellent.
Okay. So again, this is a socially motivated reinforcement. So you want an item, you want an activity is your A column. So, right now I might want my cell phone or I might want a coffee. I get engaged in a behavior and I successfully get that. So if I yelled over to Maya, can you grab me a coffee? And she got me one, that behavior would have successfully got me a coffee. But sometimes those behaviors can look a little more negative as well, other than shutting across the room. So, all right, so we chose exactly the same behaviors again. So if your behaviors arrived late in class, your phone in the antecedent might have been in your pocket or had to go in your pocket before class or had to go in your locker or had to go to the teacher depending on the situation. You gave up your phone so that you could arrive in class. When you are late for class, you are then sent to the hallway to wait to talk to the teacher, but in that time you get to talk on your phone, right? So that could have successfully allowed you to access a phone if you know that every time you're late, you are then sent out to the hallway to wait to talk to someone. So what happened here? Successfully being late every day allowed them a little bit more time with their phone, from being late, but also because once they were late, then they got sent to the hall and had some extra time with their phone. So we look at stuff like this a lot in high school. We're like, what did he do when he left the class, right? Oh, interesting. You talk to his friends about So that could be an example of a tangible behavior for arriving late in class. Same with completes math worksheet equations. So if the teacher said when you guys are finished with your math sheet, then you can have some extra time on your iPads or on your laptops or free time to do something. Completing that math sheet would allow them to access free time on the computer or whatever the free time was with that item. So what happened here was completing your math sheet, which is a behavior that we want to increase, allowed them access to the tangible that they were looking for. And last but not least, this tangible is a little more simple. You can see the item, so you're like, oh, okay, he got that. It's a little easier to understand than attention escape, which you can't always see what's happening there. So transitioning from one activity to the next. If they were at circle time, for example, he transitioned from one activity to the next because his favorite song was playing at circle. So if you're having trouble with a transition and you know that the favorite song is Skinnamarink-a-ding, and you want...
Again, 90s.
I know.
That's hilarious.
So transitioning them to circle time would be easier if they were arriving to their favorite song or activity at circle. So what's happening here is that transition was successful because they got to access what they loved in the seat column. So again, the tangible one is a little bit easier. And honestly, I would say that we typically don't write a lot of behavior plans around tangible because what's going on with tangible often is we were putting in communication systems and it's simply a matter of I don't have a better way to access what I want, I would say is most often a tangible condition. So if you've got a kiddo who doesn't have a communication system, that is first and foremost what will be happening before we're putting in any type of behavior plan because we need them to have a replacement behavior that is successful.
Right, and another reason why tangible behaviors aren't as often, I would say, seen as a function of behavior or challenging behavior is because it's the first repertoire in verbal behavior that you learn, demanding or requesting, right? So we did a whole webinar last year on verbal behavior and the 8 verbal operants, and I want to say, what did we call it?
I don't know, but we do have our webinar list there. So
yeah, so it's one of those.
I
have to think about it. Yeah. And so what we did there is describe to you why manding is first, right? Why, when you meet a little baby and they're starting to evoke language, they usually will, their first repertoire is to get stuff, milk, baba, mama, that kind of stuff, before they learn how to label things and engage in interverbal conversation and all that kind of stuff. So it's not a surprise to us that a lot of challenging behavior don't have a tangible function. Not that it's impossible. It's certainly possible, especially when kids don't have manding repertoires or when they don't have a way to request what they want. So I'll bop you over the head for it because then you'll probably give me stuff. You know what I mean? Because you're trying to distract me. And a lot of times when you have that kind of intervention plan of like, when he's engaging in problem behavior, I'll distract him and bring him over to his favorite, water table or to his favorite activity or his favorite book. Then you're inadvertently reinforcing it because he's like, how do I get stuff around me? I don't have a big repertoire of skills to get stuff, but man, if I fall to the ground right now and start kicking my feet, somebody will come over to me and offer me something. And we do that very good-naturedly thinking we're distracting the student out of the problem behavior, and we totally get that. We don't judge that. I did it last night with my 4-year-old because I was like, let's just distract this girl so mama can get the dishes done. Like, I need to get out of this. And I knowingly reinforce that behavior, right? But again, she's neurotypical. She's got a wide repertoire of tangible behavior. She's very verbal, more verbal than me half the time. And so I know she's got a big repertoire. I'm not going to create sort of a behavior chain of problem behavior. But a lot of our students, unfortunately, that's kind of what's happening in their life more than it's not. So then it becomes little Mr. Billy has a lot of problem behavior. You know what I mean?
Yeah, so you're definitely going to see a lot more tangible maladaptive behavior when there is no functional communication, so they can't use their verbal skills to access what they want. So that doesn't mean that they're completely nonverbal. We see lots of kiddos who have all these words but never really use them for what they're needed for. Or also sometimes what happens is when the response requirement is way too long. So for example, if a child's just learning their verbal skills and they kind of say like ball, cat, I want a ball, please, is a lot harder than ball when they don't have any skills. So sometimes it's also that they can't produce that response demand when they're in a stressful situation. So they're flopping on the floor and often accessing it.
Yeah, like the response effort is too great. Yeah. It's just like when we're learning a new language, when I don't know, stick me in Germany or somewhere and I'm
motivated.
I probably want to figure out like, how do I get a Pepsi really quick?
Oh yes, yeah,
right?
you don't need to.
Yeah. So how do I get like an ice cream cone quickly? I'm gonna learn the word for ice cream and say it to people until I get reinforcement. And when my brain starts to get reinforcement, I'm gonna go keep up that behavior. If I just blurt out a random behavior with ice cream in French. Okay, if I said that, not French, crème glacée, if I said that and it didn't meet reinforcement, my brain would go, wrong word, Jen, shut it off. Don't do that behavior again. It didn't meet reinforcement. Does that make sense? As soon as I get the reinforcement, now we're learning something new.
Gets that reinforcement every time for saying crème glacée, then she's going to learn to expand on that because now it's become more easier to at least say that, and then she'll learn to expand.
That's right. Once people stop asking me questions back, like, did you want one? Are you pointing at one? What are you saying, lady? And once I'm more reinforced by, like, can I have a crème glacée? Whatever that looks like in French. Once I learned that, I know French users are like, we need to talk to you. Once I learned that whole thing, then it's much easier for me to get what I need. And so my behavior is more reinforced by a bigger effort. Does that make sense? Yeah. Cool. Sensory. We love talking about sensory. Behavior that is automatically reinforced. So think about your senses, the sight, taste, smell, touch, sound. It happens anytime. Sensory behaviors are not socially mediated. So I want you to sit with that for a second. If it's truly a sensory behavior, it is not socially mediated. Why we like to make that distinction compared to all the other functions of behavior is because very rarely when I'm involved in a case, even if it's a student with ASD or some other kind of diagnoses, a lot of people assume that a lot of their behaviors are sensory function. And I don't think I have a case yet since I've been with the board where it was just sensory function.
Being that the problem behavior was just sensory function. We engage in sensory behaviors all day long. That's not up for debate. It's that when we actually are targeting a specific behavior for change, it is almost never entirely sensory.
And the reason why we're about to show you different examples than we've used so far. We're not going to use the arriving late for class and all that stuff, because if your student is doing those things, we actually couldn't think of an example of why that would make sense to be a sensory related function. Unfortunately, we assume that based on diagnoses sometimes, but we don't want to do that. We don't want to assume anything based on a diagnosis. We want to assume things and judge things based on some really good data-driven decision making. And so what it looks like when it's sensory is there's a behavior, so it can be any behavior, right before I'm lacking sensory feedback or I'm getting too much sensory feedback. So I engage in a certain behavior, fill in the blank behavior, where I then gain access to the feedback, or the feedback is removed. So when it's too much, I engage in behavior and the feedback is removed. When it's not enough, I engage in behavior and it gets some feedback. Does that make sense? So when I show you these examples, they'll make a lot of sense. So I have a dry throat, which is true for me right now. I drink water, drink. My dry throat is gone. What that behavior sequence looks like, that behavior contingency, is that what happened here, drinking water made my dry throat go away. So what do you think is going to happen next time I have a dry throat? I'm going to evoke this behavior to get this reinforcement. Does that make sense? So again, all behavior is predictable. It always happens in this loop. I have a headache. I take an Advil. Advil blocks the pain, which I feel like I should be in the commercial because that's probably like right from the commercial. What happened here? The Advil successfully blocked my headache. So what am I going to do next time I have a headache? I'm going to take the Advil. Does this make sense?
And notice that the A's and C's are not social, right? No one had to be there for you to have a dry throat or for you to have a headache, and no one had to be there for you to get the water or to
deliver your consequences
for the pain. Now, I mean, you could say that the water thing, depending on the student, would need you to get them the water. Yes, we understand that there would also be some tangible in there. But that also leads to our point is most sensory behaviors are multifunctional. Yes. So it's very rarely sensory alone. Yeah.
And then, so say it's a sunny day, I put on my sunglasses, so I'm not squinting anymore and I can see properly. That allows me to successfully be able to see when it's a sunny day. So there's a lot of things that we do that might block too much feedback sensory-wise, or get access to some sensory function. The important thing to note here, though, is a lot of times, like we always use the headphone example, when I'm involved in a case and right away they're like, we put headphones on Johnny. Cool, great. Why? Well, he has autism. Okay, let's not put headphones on Johnny because he has autism. I'm assuming there was a challenging behavior that was leading to this decision. So what was the challenging behavior? Well, he cried every time we brought him into the gym. Okay. And so was your thinking process that it was too loud in the gym, too overwhelming in the gym, too whatever in the gym? Yeah. And so we put headphones on. Great. Did that totally solve it? Because now he's going to the gym, he's running to that gym, he's happy to be in the gym, he goes in, no problem, right? That should be the case if it's strictly a sensory function and you've solved it with the headphones. I don't know of cases like that right now anyway. I'm sure they're out there.
I have one case right now where there is a student in the classroom who cries very, very loud. And one of the other boys in the classroom on his own goes over, gets the headphones, puts them on it, and he continues to work. Right? So that would actually be a sensory function. He's found an adaptive way to deal with the crying, and he doesn't know other part of the day. It's just the crying. And honestly, when I'm in the classroom, like I could use some headphones to it. It's pretty loud. So that would be an example of sensory, but it's not a problem behavior. It's an adaptive behavior. And he takes them off.
In there, right? Escaping the crying, because maybe he would do it in other situations.
Yeah.
Right?
I mean, it's because he sits directly beside her. I mean, there's a lot going on. But again, it wasn't him that we were targeting. He just found that strategy on his own. It was the crying. But I mean, that is a little bit of a negative sensory thing of, making that sound go away. But it's also the fact that it's an adaptive behavior. It's only happening in this one specific loud situation. Often what happens is we kind of generalize those sensory behaviors to just because one situation, then they might need it for every other situation. And that's not necessarily the case. So we don't want this neurotypical boy wearing headphones the rest of his life because that really loud crying is happening right now that we're targeting, right? So that behavior will go away very quickly once it's happening. But that was literally the only thing I could think of right now. And there is other.
Yeah, so I guess our only cautionary tale of sensory is that we all need some sensory feedback. We have to be careful what we're assuming is a sensory function. Sometimes what happens is, like I always tell the story of the hands clapping, but it could be anything. It could be, your kiddo, I don't know, bangs his head on the table, and you're thinking, oh my gosh, he needs sensory feedback. Let's get him a bunch of soft stuff to bang his head on, so that he can get the feedback but still be safe. That very likely is not going to be an effective intervention if in fact he's banging his head for attention, because he knows that's the only behavior I have in my repertoire that gets 3 people by my side immediately, right, and talking to me. Or if it's for tangible, that's the only behavior that in my learned history I've engaged in where everybody seems to show up with an iPad and my favorite toy to distract me. Then all of a sudden that's the way that I get stuff, right? Or if it becomes escape, when I bang my head, all of a sudden everyone goes, he needs a body break, get him out of the room, and all the work goes away, right? Or all the demands go away, or all that kind of stuff. So we don't want you to assume something's a sensory function. If you are dealing with a sensory behavior, then you definitely want to involve the behavior consultant at your school to help dive into what the actual function is. Or if you're an assessment class with behavior analyst, for sure.
I would think too that Jen and I have often seen a lot of behaviors that I'm like, it probably started as sensory when they were really little. So something like flapping. All kiddos flap. Like even my 3-year-old sometimes is like, oh, she's really excited. You know what I mean? It's just kind of like, I don't really have anything else to do with my hands right now. I'm really excited, right? But what often happens is that behavior has now become a different function because so many people redirected them to put their hands down or redirected them to do something else with their hands. So now it's become a little bit of escape. When I'm doing this, I can't be doing any work. Or it's become when I do this, more people will run over and redirect my hands. When I'm doing this, someone gives me something to hold in my hands. So now it's become attention, escape, or tangible. So what we want to make sure that we do is don't assume it's sensory. We want to make sure we take that behavior data, because if it is sensory, sometimes it's something that I just don't care to change because we all have our own behaviors, right? And we all definitely have sensory behaviors. I mean, my husband's like, if you chew on another pen cap, I'm never buying pens again, right? Or like this, and there's just things that we all do that, if someone tried to change my pen chewing behavior, I'd be very upset with them, So we're not often targeting sensory behaviors unless they're really dangerous anyways. So that's why we kind of want to make sure, we definitely want to make sure that we take that data to assume or not assume that it's a sensory, and that we actually have a good hypothesis based on that data.
And that's an important distinction to make. In applied behavior analysis, we're an inductive science. We take all of the data and then build a hypothesis from it. We do not use mentalistic ideas or mentalistic terms we don't infer what the student might be thinking or feeling. We don't do things like that. We observe the behavior, we take really good data based on that, and then we come up with a hypothesis. So it's all observable, measurable, and very specific, right? So we at no time go like, well, we come up with a hypothesis and then we test it. We don't do that until we're way past the point of involvement in a case. So for example, when I'm first involved, I take a lot of data, I come up with a hypothesis, we put an intervention in place. If that intervention fails, then I either got the function wrong, right? Or it's multifunctional, and so I need more interventions. And most behaviors, or a lot of behaviors anyway, are multifunctional. We've given you really simple examples, but some of you were hopefully thinking, what if your student is late for class because he was on his phone and because he was in an attention-deprived condition, and so him getting in trouble, going in the hallway, getting a one-to-one discussion with the teacher or the principal, and then sitting on his phone while he waits for that person to come. Like, what if it's both?
That's more likely the situation than not.
Totally,
right?
because behavior is really complex. So even when we're teaching functional behavior, it's difficult to give examples that won't actually, in practice, be multifunctional, and that's harder to treat and it's harder to explain. But hopefully, sort of you understand there's a difference between the 4 functions of behavior, and that every single living organism who engages in behavior does so for one of these 4 reasons. Okay, and so it's not just challenging behavior, it's all behavior that we do.
And so if you've been to our level 2, what we do then is we go to the A's and the C's and we keep that function there. And what we do is we look at what behavior would allow that function to continue in a positive way. Because what we want to do is give them a replacement behavior that's still going to allow them to access that function, right? If you need attention, great. You should totally get all the attention in the world. But how can you do that effectively without, engaging in problem behavior? The same with escape. We all need breaks, let me tell you. Like, we all have strategies for that. And how can we give them an antecedent condition that will evoke an appropriate way for them to get that escape? And then how can we reinforce that by just providing them the escape when they ask for it and the same with the tangible? Sensory is a whole different ballpark, and we don't even get into how to actually address it because it's so individualized and it's so different for each and every situation that there's no like, this is what you do other than providing them with reinforcement for when it's not happening. Every single behavior that we teach will just replace this behavior and give you new antecedents and consequences that will provide that same function. So if you don't do that, if you have a behavior that you're simply reinforcing it not happening or reinforcing something else, what's going to happen? That behavior will come back or a different one will replace it and you might not like it. Why? Because that function's not going anywhere. We all need attention, escape, tangible, and sensory things. It's just how do we get them? That's the problem, not necessarily that the function is the problem. So if you don't have a replacement behavior and you're not working on a skill acquisition, it's not going to work ever because it's just going to come back and sometimes with a vengeance, right? Yeah.
Okay. So we have an ABA training, Google Plus community that we love when people join. What we do is we post these webinars on the community afterward. And we post other kinds of videos where we show you different ways to teach different skill acquisition targets. So far we have everything from matching to how to teach waiting to how to teach responding to your name, lots of different skills like that. We should do one on how to teach break effectively. I feel like that would actually be a really good video. Because a lot of people are attempting to teach that type of a skill. But again, it wasn't based on like, all the things that we would want to look at. So if we kind of teach everybody, anyway. We can talk about that after, but so yeah, we put videos like that up there. We'll take any suggestions you have of videos you want to see. We put those up there. We post links to things, information about our training, all that kind of stuff.
We just had a contest for $50 Amazon gift card, and I'm really excited to get our Christmas contest.
Yeah, we usually do 12 days of Christmas.
Yeah,
and we'll end it. Maybe we'll end it with a wrap this year.
Sometimes we start with
like it's such a pretty stuff. Okay, that is functions of behavior. Thank you so much for joining us.
You guys have any questions? Well, you can always ask them off here too, so we can do that because I know it's probably easiest.
Yeah. So thank you for joining us. We're gonna shut this down and we'll put the link up on the Google Plus. Bye. Okay, it's over.